Hey, good morning, Port City Community Church. Hope you guys are having an amazing weekend and a fantastic Sunday so far. My name is Brett, and this is my friend Rich.
Hey, everybody, good morning.
And we just want to say welcome to church. We are here hanging out in the Connect Center in Wilmington. It's where we would normally be connecting with you guys, answering questions, having conversation about how our weeks have been. It happens at all of the different campuses at different places, and so that's what we're doing. We're here.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things too is that people are watching, we know, from all over the place.
Yep.
I saw this morning when I got up, there was someone that said they were watching from Wisconsin. And I know I've got friends that have been watching.
That's a long way away.
It's a long way away.
And it's a lot colder up there.
It is also, it is a lot colder. That was a cheesy joke. Wisconsin?
That is.
Okay, all right. I apologize. But I know I have friends watching from West Virginia.
Yeah.
And people really watching from all over the place. So we would love to know where you're watching from. So jump in the chat and let us know where you are. Let us know who you are and where you're watching from. We'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, the chat is awesome. I don't know if you've interacted on the chat at all.
I have.
As a family, it's been super fun to interact with people online. It doesn't replace being together in any way, but...
No, it's funny. We have this rule in our house when we're obviously gathered in person. My kids, I have two teenage daughters, and they want to be on their phones in church. And we would say, no, you don't play on your phone in church. But now mom and dad are sitting on the couch at home watching church, and we're on our phones chatting, and they're giving us the side eye like, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that. But quarantine rules, I guess.
The times, they are a-changing.
That is true. That is true.
If anything can be said about the last 2.5 months is that, it's been so different, but also really good in a lot of ways. So, tell us a little bit about kind of your family's experience with this whole quarantine, stay at home. What have been the changes? What have you been learning?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things that immediately jumps to mind is that our yard looks terrible. Our grass looks terrible, and part of the reason
could be the fact that in southeastern North Carolina we've had very little rain, for which we're really thankful.
That is true. That is true. Part of the reason that our grass looks terrible is because during the last several weeks, our yard has become the de facto play spot for all the kids on our street. And so at any given time during the day, there's 8 to 10 kids. They're running around in our yard. They're playing soccer. They're kicking the ball around. They're playing basketball and riding their bikes through the yard. Yeah. And our grass looks terrible. Yeah. That's probably one of the biggest things. It's funny, though. Your question was, so what's changed or, what are we learning?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, honestly, in a different part of a different season, maybe, I would have been really irritated by the fact that our yard looks bad. And that there was so much noise happening in the front yard.
Yeah, because you're at home, you're trying to get work done, and kids are playing in the yard.
They are, yeah. And so, but really, we're trying to say, or trying to understand, what are the things that are happening during this season that maybe, at another time we would have thought of as an inconvenience, or maybe as an annoying, something that's really annoying. And instead of looking at them that way, how can we look at them as opportunities? So now I've got a yard full of kids. What opportunity do I have now to connect with them, to connect with my neighbors, to know who my kids are playing with?
Yeah, that's good.
It's really wild. So that's one thing we're learning. How about y'all?
Well, I kind of feel like it's a similar thing. That's something my wife is actually trying to help me learn because I am the primary dishwasher, and we are washing so many dishes in our house. We're actually running the dishwasher more than we're running the washing machine because we're just wearing the same clothes, but apparently my kids need to use 5 different cups throughout the day. But she's trying to help me understand I ran the dishwasher twice yesterday, but really that's a sign of the fact that we're all home, we're together, we have more opportunities to eat together. And so it's about how do we look at what's going on in our world, which are the things that are frustrating and things that are kind of annoying about what we're dealing with, but seeing them as opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. So I saw one opportunity that you had to connect with your kids. You built a skateboard ramp.
I did. I built a skateboard ramp. I say it was for my kids, but that's just a good excuse because I really wanted a ramp. So I built a quarter pipe. And we've been doing that, and it was fun because I got to do that alongside of my 2 boys who skate. They got to learn how to use tools, and it definitely slowed the process down.
Yeah.
But we're just doing different things. We're doing things that we wouldn't normally have time to do, but because we have the time, we've been engaging in different ways.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So yesterday, Sue and I were talking. We were
And Sue is your wife.
Sue is my wife.
Right?
Yeah,
Little
she is
context for people who don't know you like I do.
She is my wife. But we were chatting and we were saying like, normally, whatever normal means, we have something going on almost every single night of the week.
We're the same way.
Right?
Soccer, school stuff,
We've
everything.
got 3 girls, Emily, who is going to be 15 in June, Sarah, who's going to be 14 in October, and then Charlotte, who just turned 11. They're all into something, and so we've got something going on every night of the week, and now during this season, we have nothing going on any night of the week.
It's kind of nice.
It is. It actually is kind of nice. Like there's this thing I think that we're understanding or starting to learn. Like, and I think all of us feel it in different times. Like when our pace is that fast, it feels unnatural. Do you know what I mean? Like it feels like we're. Like I know we've had conversations at our house about like the fact that like should we really have something going on every single night of the week where we're choking down Chick-fil-A between practices,
right?
And so like we're trying.
If there's anything to choke down, it would be Chick-fil-A.
It would be Chick-fil-A.
That's worth it.
It would be. But like like our. Can we embrace this thing that's happening right now? And instead of just getting through it, the thing that we've been trying to figure out as a family is how can we actually be closer because of this thing that's happening? And listen, that was a question that we asked early on. And it felt like it was an easy question to answer. But I think like almost all families right now, like I think we're starting to feel some of that quarantine fatigue.
Yeah. You want to get out and do some of the things that you used to enjoy. But I guess the question is, how do we, when those things start coming back, find that balance of being able to enjoy those things but not have them take over our lives and our families?
Oh man, that's such a good question.
I think that's something that all of us are probably trying to figure out, like what is, as things start opening back up and we start moving back to normal. I mean, the challenge that Mike has been giving us, our senior pastor, is normal implies the past. So how do we think about the future in maybe a different way, a new normal, right?
Yeah. So like student ministries is not gathering in person right now, but there is a new normal or something you're experiencing.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
thinking
called
about the future.
being YouTube stars. Apparently, that's what all youth pastors across the country are learning, how to be social media influencers. But we've had to try to figure out what does ministry look like, and it's different. And I think what we're starting to ask ourselves now is how do we take some of the things that we're learning that are different about student ministries that are actually really good and keep that going when we're able to gather again.
Yeah, that's really good. In children's ministry, we have been trying during this season to answer really one specific question, and it's what do families need right now? And our assumption is that what families need today is going to be different than what families need tomorrow. It's different than what they needed 2 weeks ago, and I assume it's going to be different than what they need 2 weeks from now because the situation that we're in is constantly evolving. So what do families need right now, and how can we be helpful? That's the question that we're trying to answer right now.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways that we're trying to do that. And so one of the ways that we're doing that, you mentioned being on YouTube. In children's ministry, a lot of the kids don't have phones, so we're taking this opportunity to connect with families. But we have been leaning an awful lot more into social media and into Pinterest. And so
could you imagine this pandemic without social media and the ability to connect with people and actually reach them through that? I mean, it's been a great tool.
Yeah, I mean, imagine not having FaceTime or Zoom and you're supposed to be quarantined in your house and you don't get to see anybody. I mean, seeing somebody via FaceTime is great. It's great. Yeah. It's not the same as seeing them in person. Yeah. I don't think, but it's a great thing. If we didn't have the opportunity to do it, it would be so strange. Yeah. Partially what makes meeting via FaceTime or Zoom so strange is that you don't always get to see what's happening with people. You don't get to feel their body language or their energy as you're talking to them. And we were talking before about how strange that is with face masks too. I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but you're out in public with people and they're maybe walking towards you. They've got a face mask on and you can't tell, are they smiling? Are they angry? Are they talking to you?
You should be able to read that in the eyes.
You should.
You should be able to tell smiling eyes versus frowning or angry eyes, but it's not always that easy.
It's not.
And when do you say hi?
Well, okay. Well, who knows the answer to that question? It's funny. I actually think there probably are some social etiquette rules that we all understand. You probably say hi to someone when they're in just a few feet of you. Yeah. But what
happens when it's 6 feet?
It's this weird gray area. So people, you can't see their face because they're covered in a mask. You don't know if you should say hi to them. And it's creating all kinds of really awkward social moments. Yeah. And then I wonder, when you do bump into someone that you know out in public, do you shake their hand?
No,
Do you give them a hug? You can't. It's elbows?
Yeah, that's it.
So I'm wondering, like, are people actually going to start shaking hands again?
I hope they do. I hope that the shaking of the hand which is the basis of business. Like that's what business is built on, is a handshake doesn't go away.
It's funny, like it does seem like in a business transaction that feels so official. Like I've seen people where they're kicking feet together.
That
like, can you
doesn't
imagine
work.
a
No,
big business transaction go
No,
down?
because you'll
You see
scuff your shiny business
guys in a
shoes.
suit kick each other's feet together. It feels real weird.
Yeah, so as much as we would love to keep this conversation going, because it's so great to see you face to face, I know everybody online watching would love to be able to connect face to face, but if there's anything that we can do digitally to connect with you, the Connect card is going to be coming up. The link will be in the chat. There will be a QR code that you can scan with your camera on your phone. We want to still connect with you, so make sure that you're using the Connect card to answer or to ask questions, to figure out ways to connect with the church. We still would love to be able to do that. We're getting ready to start the service. Mike is going to be doing week 2 of The Way, a series we started last week, and the band is going to be leading us together in worship. So hopefully you are gathered around with your family and ready to watch, and we'd love to invite you to engage in the service. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Yeah, church, it's great to be with you this morning. Let's worship together. Every breath, it is a gift. Every moment is a treasure. All my past and my regrets, my present and my future. Every table is a feast, every heartbeat is an altar. Every step a mystery, oh, I'm walking with the author. I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes. All praise, all praise. Heaven bent to meet us, Father, Son, and Spirit. All praise. God and man together, one with us forevermore. So in famine we will lead, in drought we'll see a downpour. Let all our fighting cease. Oh, the Prince of Peace is conquered. So I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes upon you. I fix my eyes. All praise.
Don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle. Why should my heart grow weary? Don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle.
Why should my heart grow weary? And don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle. Why should my heart grow weary? And don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle. Sing, oh praise, oh praise. Heaven bent to meet us, Father, Son, and Spirit. Oh praise, oh praise. God and man together, one with us forever. Oh praise, oh praise. Heaven bent to meet us, Father, Son, and Spirit. Oh praise, oh praise. God and man together, one with us forever. So why should my heart grow weary? And don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle. And why should my heart grow weary? And don't be so downcast, oh my soul. You are in every moment. You are my greatest miracle.
Continue to focus our eyes on Jesus, our hearts on Him, our worship focused on Him wherever we are. The cross is my beginning, the line drawn in the sand, the end of all my striving. Now I am born again. There Jesus was forsaken, so I will never be. His grace is my salvation, the gifts of God, the work of Calvary. It is done, it is finished. Christ has won, He is risen. Grace is here, love is triumphed over death forever. The cross needs no addition. His mercy is complete. His love is not in question. The Son of God has spoken over me. It is done. It is finished. Christ has won. He is risen. Grace is here. Love is triumphed over death forever. His word stands final and forever. It will not be shaken. He alone has won it all. We sing strongholds bowing to the Savior. Resurrection power over every circumstance. His word stands final and forever. It will not be shaken. He alone has won it all. It is finished. Christ has won. Hallelujah. He is risen. Grace is here. Love is triumphed over death. Forever it is finished. Oh, mercy won, and I am forgiven. Sing His name. He is worthy of praise. Oh,
Come on, church. Man, what a Sunday to be together already. To sing those songs with Olivia and Brian and be led by them is amazing. And we're so grateful that you joined in with us today, that we can be together, be connected in online in this moment, worshiping God together. Now, we would love to be all here and to be at all of our campuses together right now. But I think that God is painting a beautiful picture for us in this season where we can't gather together. And that's the picture of family, right? That the church is family. And you feel that when we're all together, but right now we're scattered and we're in our homes and we're with our families. Or maybe you're by yourself in your home, but the reality is you represent a family. And today in this moment, as we're connected in, worshiping God together, we are families scattered through our city, our region, and even our world, united together by the name of Jesus as one family, as the family of God. And that is really special, and that's what we get to be a part of today. And as we move from this time of singing into this time of generosity, I want to share with you just kind of briefly what I've been learning this week. Me and my friend have been reading through 1 Samuel together. And it's this beautiful picture of Samuel's life where he came from his mother, Hannah, who couldn't have a child. She prayed for a son, and she said, God, if you give me a son, I'll give him back to you to serve you all the days of his life. And at the end of the chapter is this beautiful picture where Hannah brings her son Samuel to the temple. And it says, she says, therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. This idea that Hannah desired something and God provided. But what Hannah did is she lent that back to God. She said, yeah, God, you've given me a son, but I'm gonna lend him back to you. I'm gonna let you borrow him back to do what you want to with him because you'll do the best with him. And that's just a beautiful picture of generosity to me, that God's given us things, he's provided things to us, but we're just gonna lend it back to him. Say, God, this is a beautiful provision. I'm gonna lend it to you. Whether that's our time or our resources, our energy, or even our finances. That we would be a generous people who just lend what God gives us back to God. And so if you're a part of our church, if you call Port City Community Church your home church, we would love to invite you just to be generous with your finances in this season. And this is a season where our money feels like real provision, but that we would be willing to lend it back to God. So we'd invite you to do that. If you're watching today and you're a part of another church, you consider that church your home, man, give there, be generous there. Let's lean in together with the things that God has given to us, and let's simply lend them back to God. Hey, church, in just a moment, our pastor Mike is coming out. He's gonna lead us into our second part of this series, The Way. I'm so excited to hear from him and learn together. So let's lean in right now and let's give God our everything, and let's receive from him what he wants to give us today. Thank you, church.
Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or wherever you might be watching us from. I'm so glad that you guys are have chosen to join with us today. And just like Clay mentioned a second ago, we have to lean in to try to pay attention to what God is doing. And this is such an important time for us, I believe as a church, certainly, but also as individuals. So I am asking you to lean in. We're gonna talk about some things today a little bit directly and kind of let you know where we've been. Part of what we're talking about in this idea of the way, there's a way of life that has been made available to us. And so I've been drawing it like this, and this space that exists between this place where God's rule and reign are, and this place where we live here in this world where we're governed by the patterns of this world. That's how the scriptures talk about this. In fact, that's a terrible circle. I said last week, I got home from the services last week, and my daughter, as soon as I walked in the door, she says, "Dad, I don't hate circles," because I think I mentioned that she hates circles. And she said the reason she hates circles is because, she wanted to explain this, I'm gonna explain this to everyone, is because when she draws them in her notes, she often draws ovals. And so she said she didn't like circles for that reason. It wasn't that she was psychotic or psych or something like that. But there's this space where these two things overlap, where God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. It happens in this place where his rule and reign are. And that's in my heart, in my mind, in your heart, and in your mind. I'm trying to get us to understand this way of life in which we live. And we talked about this last week, that suppose there's a place and time where something has been promised, and there's a span when that promise was given until that promise is fulfilled. And what I believe and what I'm asking us to believe is that all the things that happen in between here and there are all important, right? I think we could sit down and look at our lives and realize that how we got to be the way that we are, the things that have happened in our lives, all the things have been so instrumental in us becoming who we are, that every step seems to be important. And what happens to us is things start to get pressed, and we start to get in a hurry to get where we want to be, to get this promise fulfilled, to figure out what we've always wanted. We begin to figure out how we can bypass steps or collapse this timeline. And so what I talked about last week is this is why these places or these points in time where we continually surrender ours, that we don't bypass any one of these moments or any one of these necessary steps that are so important for what God is doing in us and what he's doing through us. I talked about surrender intervals. Surrender intervals is the span of time between points of surrender. For some of you, you just remember that again because your last point of time where you surrendered was last Sunday at the end of the message, and you say, God, I just surrender my life to you today. And then you woke up this morning, you joined us online, and now you're like, oh, I got to surrender again. So it's once a week. For some of you, you've been walking with the Lord every day. You get up in the morning and you say, God, I surrender you today. And you have a surrender interval of 24 hours. And what I'm trying to get us to understand is that 24 hours is way too long. We need to surrender as a way of life. And that's what I want to talk about today, that surrender is the way in which we learn how to live in this way. The best example I can think of to help us understand what I'm trying to get across is when it comes to scuba diving. Let me go ahead and mark this down so you'll see. This is the place of heaven. This is the place of earth. But I'm not a scuba diver, but I was certified a few years ago. It's one of the coolest experiences of my life. I shared this before. But when you scuba dive, one of the things you do in training is they teach you how to use all your equipment. And interestingly enough, the thing that you put in your mouth is called a regulator. And that's important for us to know. You put this thing in your mouth and it regulates the oxygen and the pressure in the tank coming into your mouth to make it a usable form. That's what happens. It makes it usable as you need it. And so you get familiar with all the equipment, and then you do your training dives. We did ours in a swimming pool. And I remember the first time we put on our tanks, and we got in the water, we put our masks on, put the regulator in our mouth, and we go to the bottom. And you're sitting there and you're looking around, and I'm going, I can breathe underwater. You're just, I can breathe. I can just sit here forever. Just sit here. This is the coolest thing, that I am underwater and I can breathe. Then you go through all these exercises where you have to learn what happens when certain things happen. If your mask gets knocked off, or your regulator gets yanked out, or whatever it might be. And I remember when they talk about learning how to take our mask off or getting our mask back on, you have to take your mask off underwater, learn how to purge the water in your mask and put it back on. And you're sitting there with your regulator in and you pull your mask off, and the instructor comes over and he actually holds your shoulders. He puts his hands on your shoulders and he goes through the hand motions, and you take your mask off. And as soon as you take your mask off and the water rushes into your face, your legs almost immediately push off the bottom to get to the top. It's almost instinctive because there is a way of life that we are used to. We are used to breathing in air, and anything that's foreign to that threatens that, right? So we're sitting there, and as soon as that water rushes in, we've got to get back to the way things were because we can't tolerate this. And so you realize for just a second, the water rushes in, and then you just start breathing through your mouth. And you realize, oh, I can still breathe. And as long as you sort of remain in that place, in that way, and you get through what it feels like is gonna happen, you feel like you're gonna drown, you feel like you can't breathe, but the reality is you actually can, then you can sort of orient yourself again, get your mask, put it back on. But it's really important in those moments that you're able to reorient yourself so you don't shoot to the surface and cause yourself harm. And the same thing is true in our spiritual lives. There's a way of life that we live in all the time, that we swim in all the time, that we are affected by all the time. And there's another way that is introduced to us in the way of Jesus, in the power, in the way of the Holy Spirit. And it's a fundamentally different way for us to breathe and to enter. And anything that sort of threatens that makes us want to shoot back to the way things were. And this is going to be true of all of us. And so last week, I kind of opened up this can of race. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But I talked about the reason for us to understand this is because the way in which Jesus came to establish is the way of his kingdom. And what helps us fight against all these injustices in our world, including white supremacy, is to develop a mindset and a heart set of kingdom supremacy. And it was marked by at least 3 ways. And this is my current kind of thinking about this. But the way of the kingdom, this idea of leveraging our lives for kingdom supremacy, hinges on 3 things. The way in which we live under the authority of his rule and his reign, the way we come underneath his authority. That's way number 1. That's kind of the first marker of this. Marker number 2 is the way in which we leverage our lives for others for the sake of his love. The way that we leverage and give our lives for others for the sake of his love. And number 3, the way in which we depend on his way to be our way. Lastly, we said it like this, that his way, our way goes away when we walk in his way, that we learn how to depend on his way to become our way. Jesus said, right, we read this last week, that we need help with this. We need help with this. We can't do this on our own. We need something to regulate the way in which this source comes to us for the right here and right now. And so I want to take a moment. We're going to be looking in Galatians chapter 5 today. And I want to just kind of read this over us to invite us to get a perspective of what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. And I want us to sort of walk through a couple of things with this frame over us. Then we'll take a deeper dive and engage with it a little bit more toward the end of our time. In Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 13, it says this. It says, "You, my brothers and sisters, you were called to be free." We love freedom. We love freedom. You were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. And he starts to separate these two ways of life, but rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour one another, watch out, or you'll be destroyed by each other. So I say to you, walk in the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They exist in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. So we underline that. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The way of life that we have been given, that has been made available, affects the way in which we live. And I want us just to back up, and I want to talk about this, but you understand that we swim in a culture. We live in a way that influences us and affects us in profound ways. Paul writes about this in Romans 12 as the patterns of this world. You know, all of us know that the culture of your family can shape the way that you live. You know that the culture of your friends can shape the way you live. You know the culture of your workplace. All these things that exist around us that we live within, they all affect the way that we live. The culture in which we dwell shapes our way of life. And it also shapes the way in which we see the world. I almost titled this message, Race, Reopening, and the Way of the Spirit. You see, last week, if you remember, if you did not catch it or watch it, I encourage you to go back and watch it. I cracked open the conversation about race and racial justice and white supremacy. And I'm very encouraged by the way our church has responded to this. I've gotten a lot of emails and comments of support. I've also gotten a lot of emails and comments about struggle. And both of these are a critical part of how we process things that we are learning to see differently than what we have always seen. This is a part of the process. It's my experience, it's your experience, it will be your experience. As a church, we made available Be the Bridge, and there was a lot of response to that, just to learn and to lean in and to embrace and to engage in a process by which we learn and come to understand that we leverage our freedom for the sake of other people. You see, the way of the kingdom requires us to enter in and to work for the redemption and the reconciliation of all things, and racial injustice is a part of that work. This is just the beginning point for us to really understand how we as a people of God who walk in the way of Jesus learn how to be a part of his redemption in this world in some of the most difficult issues that we face. I think there is great reason for us to be hopeful in this. Last week, as a part of this conversation, I invited Gerald Fadiami. He is a friend of ours. He's been here, spoke several times in our college ministry, and on Sundays mornings, he'll be back with us toward the end of the summer this year as well. And I asked him to come on and have a conversation with me. He's an African-American man from Atlanta, pastor and friend, and to give us, just to share his experience and to bring and help us understand some perspective. And we began to talk about some of the things, and what he said was so important. He said, if we can create distance between something that allows us or it affords us the luxury or the privilege to ignore it. For example, world hunger or water issues in other parts of the world aren't pressing on us because they're distant from us. The fact they're far away gives us the freedom not to concern ourselves with them. In fact, I was just on a conference call this week with Convoy of Hope, and the starvation rates in the world have been set back. Some experts believe been set back 30 years in the last 7 weeks because of this pandemic. What is happening worldwide is astounding. And because it's distant, it's easy for us to use and to afford us the freedom not to be concerned about it. And it's the same thing that's true when issues don't affect us directly. We can distance ourselves from them and then remain indifferent to them. So it takes a lot of humility and a lot of effort to lean in and to understand. And Gerald and I were talking about this very thing. And I was sharing with him sort of my own problem. What I almost said was that the problem that a lot of white people experience, and I don't want to really generalize that much, I'll just say my own problem. I'll speak for me. It has always been defensiveness. And as soon as someone starts talking about race, I'll try to sort of swim out of the conversation and you start to think, well, why does it always have to be about race? And part of the reason is because I don't want to be to blame, or I don't want to be blamed, and I just sort of push myself away and become defensive about it. And Gerald and I talked about that, and what he said was so helpful to me in a lot of issues, not just this one. He said, Mike, just because something isn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. Just because something is not your fault does not mean it's not your responsibility. What a calling for us as a people of God who are called to live under the rule and reign of God himself in his kingdom. You understand that in the culture that we live in, the culture that we swim in, we are taught never to acknowledge anything that might be used against us. Our posture is almost always one of defense. We remain silent. We don't want to say anything that would make us complicit. And so we distance ourselves so as not to be a part of the problem. And what happens is this creates a vacuum, and the blame game assumes or ensues, and everything gets divided up and everybody takes sides. And the disastrous consequence of the blame game is that no one takes responsibility. This is not how the kingdom works. This is the exact opposite of dominion and rule. The authority of Jesus, the way that he has made available to us, demands us to take responsibility. And Gerald actually shared insights from the Good Samaritan, which Jesus used very intentionally because of its racial components. But he talked about the fact that the Samaritan leveraged his time, his money, and his influence. He entered in and he made himself available. He gave. This is what grace does in us. This is what love looks like. This is what the way of life under the rule of love does. And so I want us to, as we just continue to think about this, we enter in, we understand that we've got to leverage our lives for other people. And we've got to take our responsibility to enter into places, even if they don't directly affect us or we can isolate ourselves from them. We get to enter in because we are working for the redemption of all things. And before I move on, I want to take a moment and say a few words about the chaos that's surrounding the reopening, especially of churches. I want to be very clear on this. I posted about this last night because I'm aware of the back and forth that's been going on between the judges and the governor and all that. And I talked about that last night. We posted it on our social media. But what you see is and please know, I want us to get together as badly as anyone. But also realize that this is a season. There are points along this journey that are very, very important. And our tendency to get here is going to cause us to rush by them. So I want us to be really, really mindful and really, really sensitive to what it is that God is doing in us more so than anything else. And what you're seeing in our government and even what you're seeing in the church is more of the blame game. People blaming and people casting blame. People saying you're violating our rights and people saying you're trying to get everybody sick. On both sides, we've created two sides and now everybody's picking sides. And no one is taking responsibility. I'll tell you what makes me crazy is followers of Jesus demanding their rights at the expense of others. Not just their health, but their dignity, and calling people names and the efforts. They're undermining the efforts of people who are truly trying to work together, people who are demanding their rights at the expense of others. You realize this is the exact opposite of what Jesus did. I hope that we will stop and really, really consider this before we go full bore with all the things that we want demanding our ways. I'll tell you, one other thing is I do not want our church to ever be among those who show up with their fist in the air saying, we can, and so we are, this is our right, and no one is gonna take it from us. That is not how I want the posture of our church to ever be perceived by the world around us. That firmly fits in that right hand or left hand, whichever way you're sitting. In this category, it falls into the ways of this world, the indulgence of the flesh, and it falls into anything but the way of Jesus. So I want us to be different. I want you to understand that we're gonna be intentional. We're going to take our responsibility seriously. And we're gonna make decisions based on the mission and the vision that God has given to us. We're gonna follow his lead and we're gonna trust in his work. This season of waiting is so important, and I do not wanna rush ahead, even as badly as I want for us to regather again. We were very intentional from the beginning. I don't wanna pull a I told you so, but I want you to understand this. So we woke, I wanna say this because I want you to show you how, just to let you know how we made decisions that we made. In the very beginning, it was on Thursday that we made the decision to suspend our gatherings because we felt like that's what God was leading us to do. That was on Thursday. The order from the governor didn't come until Saturday. On March the 12th, we made our decision to suspend our services. And we did that because we believed it was the best way for us to serve and to be helpful to our community. That was our posture. And the reason I want you to be clear on this is because we never said that we are not meeting because the government shut us down. That's blame. We made a choice. We took responsibility for the decisions that we made. And because we did not suspend our gatherings because of an order, we are not going to make the decision to regather because of the lifting of an order. So we have to work together. We have to learn to understand what it looks like for us to regather. And this is not gonna be easy, and it's gonna require everyone working together. We're gonna have to learn how to engage online for a little while longer. We're gonna learn how to incrementally come back together. All these things are gonna be on the table as we walk forward, but it's gonna take us walking humbly and together in this. And I believe we're going to see things and experience things and understand things that we would not if we just rush back to quote normal. But this will only happen because of God's work in our lives and our willingness to trust him. It is so easily to get distracted by the kingdom of this world and to be sucked back into its patterns. But this is why Jesus said to seek first his kingdom, his rule, and his reign. We talked about this last week, right? That whatever you seek first, you will see first. And if we learn how to live and to see and to understand, if we are surrendered every moment, saying, God, help me see the way you see, help me live underneath your rule and reign. If we learn how to do this, we will begin to act and live differently. What I've been trying to echo over and over again is we are called to live in a relationship with God, and from that relationship, everything else, our participation comes from that place. And we inherit a way of life from the place that we dwell because you live on land and you're not used to living and having your air supplied by a scuba mask. When the mask comes off and the water rushes in, your tendency is to go back, and the same thing is true. We are not used to living in the way of the Spirit. We are sucked into the patterns of this world. We have to remain in these places in order for us to be changed. We will inherit the life from the place in which we dwell most. And this is why Jesus said, I want you to remain in me. So we draw life from him. Sort of theologically, there's a way of Jesus in which he modeled. He taught things. He taught things that confront us in almost every issue, from the Good Samaritan to the way he talked about loving our enemies, to the way he talked about living under or within the authority of this world. All these things he talked about, and they confront us. They challenge us. They cause us to consider things differently than we would have, but they also cause us to depend. And this is why Jesus not only said, I am the way, but he empowered us with the way. He said, I'm gonna send you a helper, his Holy Spirit. What a first century Jewish person would have understood is the same thing that was mentioned in Genesis, this ruach, this thing that animated or gave life, gave source to things. So the way of Jesus sort of modeled our lives and gives us instruction and teaching, and the way of the Spirit actually animates that life to come alive in us and to be sourced by him. And it's this language that was used, and we talked about this from the very beginning between Acts or between the resurrection and Pentecost, which we are still in that season. When I talked about this on Easter, there were 50 days between Passover and Pentecost. We are not there yet. I think we're 35 days from Passover. We got about 15 more days until Pentecost, if my math is right, about right, 14 more days. And so what we have to be able to do is this season of waiting is to really understand. And this is how he taught about it. He says that in this day, I will pour out my Spirit. And a first century Jew would have understood this. I want to look at this from Ezekiel real quick so you can see the contrast. In Ezekiel chapter 39, it says this, then they will know that I am the Lord their God, for though I sent them into exile, I allowed them to remain in this place of wonkiness and this place of distance. I will gather them again to their own land, not leaving anything behind. That's the prophecy. But here's how they would have heard this or seen this next verse 29. It says, I will no longer hide my face from them. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about seeking his face? letting him lift our face into his hands and breathing worth and value and life into us. I will no longer hide my face from them. Why? For I will pour out my spirit. And that becomes the way, this pouring out of his spirit. We are baptized into the breath of God. It's interesting, this is exactly what Jesus said, right? He said in the end of John, it says that he was with his disciples and he breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit. This is this whole idea of breath and dependency and moment by moment surrender is all through the way in which we live empowered by the Spirit. What Jesus did when he established his kingdom, there's both a system in which we live and there is a source through which we live. He established a new way for us to relate to God. This is really important for us to understand. He established a new way for us to relate to God. It was no longer, if you do this, I'll do that. It was now we are reconciled. We come back to him. We belong to him. We were made by him. He now dwells with us and we with him again. And where you dwell will determine how you live, will affect how you live. And the second thing is that Jesus established a new way to govern and to give our lives. These two rules, and I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly. But this rule over here would be governed by the law. And this would be the way of life in which you do what he says and he'll do what he says. But this way over here would be ruled in a different system. It would be under the rule or the reign of love. And we are so comfortable and we are so built on the rule of law and the way we live in this world. And what it says is this, it's marked, the rule of law is marked by rules. It is driven by or sustained by evidence or proof. And the driving value is fairness. And this is how everything works. And here's the thing about being fair. If you want to be fair, that means if someone deserves what they're getting, you don't need to bother with them. It's the exact opposite of compassion. I talked about this. We were talking about grace a few weeks ago. But that we were in India and there's a thing called karma, and Americans talk about karma very differently. Like karma is, oh yeah, man, that dude was speeding by me. Then he got pulled over by the police later on. That's karma. We like that way of life. But what karma actually is it's the opposite of grace. If you go to places where karma is the rule, what you find is people laying on the streets who are in dire need of medical care or dire need of money. You've seen people that were in hurt or harmed or injured and people walk by them. Do you know why? Because what they believe is karma, that person is getting what they deserve. Everything hinges on fairness. And you know what goes away in this system? Compassion. It just disappears in the system. The way of life under the rule of God's love is massively different. It's not governed by rules. It's governed by a relationship. I use this illustration often, but I am not faithful to my wife because of the law that was given in the Bible. I'm faithful to my wife because I love her, and to do otherwise is unthinkable. Because it is governed by, or it operates by trust or faith. And what we learn in this system, what God is doing, and whereas this tries to drive us to fairness, this is always about the redemption. This is always about what was promised from the beginning, the right relationship of one thing to everything else, shalom. And this is what we are working for. And this requires us to live in this space moment by moment, and it requires us to surrender. So I want to read these passages real quickly and slowly as we prepare to kind of close with this song. What we learned last week, I'm going to kind of bounce around, but we learned this last week, Galatians 5:23, it says this, and those who belong to Jesus Christ, or Christ Jesus, have crucified the flesh with its passions and with its desires. Do you hear that? What this means is that just because you walk with Jesus, it doesn't mean that these things are all of a sudden gonna start going away. All the things that we pull, the patterns of this world, when the water rushes in, we're still gonna wanna go back to the way they were. We're just gonna take matters into our own hands. But this has to be crucified. It is met with a violent end. And it uses this past tense thing with this present tense activity. If we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. I want to keep that mindset in front of us, that vision, that visual in front of us, that we keep in step, one breath at a time. Galatians 5:25, you start to see, if we just kind of keep jumping around, put this up there in 5:25, I think is the next verse. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. And then we back up and we see at the very beginning of this, it sets up this tension that we live in over here, Galatians 5:4. Sorry about that. Galatians 5:4. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ, and you have fallen from grace, that he has hidden his face because you've not been baptized or immersed in this way of the Spirit, to be immersed in his way, to let him saturate you. We sort of justify ourselves by the law, and this is what happens to us when you start trying to pull all the reasons why you shouldn't be involved in the other issues. You go, well, here's why I don't have to deal with that. We're trying to justify ourselves by what is fair and what is based on evidence, instead of saying, what does it mean to enter in and to love, to give of ourselves, to leverage our lives, governed by a new way, right? Governed by a new way to live our lives and to give our lives. So here's what Paul writes, and I want to look at this, verse 13. He says, you, my brothers and sisters, you were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Do you see the difference? You might have rights. You might even have justified reasons to demand those rights, and you would be correct. I meet so many people who are right in all the wrong ways, and this is exactly what Paul is talking about, what he is inviting us as people of God into this way of life. You're made to be free. Don't use your freedom to continue to build and to preserve your way of life. Use your freedom to do something that matters. He goes on and he says this, for the entire law is summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour one another, if you keep picking sides or splitting issues and picking sides, watch out, or you'll destroy each other. This is exactly what is happening. This is exactly the patterns of this world. This is exactly the things that we are pressed into. So look at what he says. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For me, the picture in my mind, I've wrestled this my whole life, right? Because there's always this pull. There's always this pull. If I am remaining and walking, keeping in step with the Spirit, it seems to say that it is impossible for me to indulge in my way of life while I am walking in his. And what it means is that I've got to take the regulator out of my mouth and try to breathe without that in order, and that those two things can't exist at the same time. That's exactly the picture. He goes on, he explains why. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit is what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict. So you've got to restrain yourself and not just do whatever you want and whatever you can justify. But if you are led by the Spirit, if you and I are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. I've heard a lot of people use this passage. Paul talks about it. We are under grace and not under law, which means we are free. We can do whatever we want to do. And what he's actually saying is being under the law is actually a much lower standard than to live under grace. To live under grace and the rule of love requires you to give yourself and to avail yourself in everything that God leads himself into. The flesh and the Spirit are in tension with each other, and this is not going away. To refuse the Spirit is to depend on the flesh. For me to take the regulator out of my mouth is to refuse the source that it brings into my life. It's interesting, Jesus said this to his disciples right before he was going to the garden to pray and surrender his will to go to the cross. He tells his disciples, hey, they fall asleep, and he says, the Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I often growing up have thought about that as this tension that I need to strengthen my flesh. That it's sort of a bad thing or a tension thing. The Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so what our mindset is we got to make the flesh stronger. And what I think Jesus is saying is it's not about making your flesh stronger. It's the flesh is weak and it cannot be depended upon. You are not made to breathe underwater. You need a source that allows it to be possible. The difference is that you and I have been made to live in the kingdom. And a source has been made possible. We have to stay in step. We have to moment by moment by moment. If you walk in the Spirit, you will not indulge or gratify the other desires. There is a way for us to live, and a way has been made. The way of the Spirit is not a solution to a problem, and it's not a way that preserves my own rights, but rather it is a way that actually ends my way. And what I want to let you guys know is that surrender isn't an event. It's a constant struggle. It's not something you do one time and then you do it again and you do it again. It is a constant pull of every time we are walking in the Spirit, there's something else that's pulling. Do you know why? Because the desires of the flesh are contrary to the way in which we've been called to live. We have to remain and dwell and walk and keep in step. And it is a constant surrender, and it requires faith. Faith is not something that you muster up to make the flesh stronger, but it comes at the point of surrender. We're gonna close with this song, and it just has this picture in it, and it's a prayer for us. It says, all I am, I surrender. All I am, I surrender. Give me faith to trust. Give me faith, God, to trust when I cannot see, when I cannot understand, when I want to be anywhere else other than where I am. Give me faith. Give me faith. My flesh may be weak, but your Spirit is strong in me. The call isn't to strengthen your flesh. It's to refuse to trust in it and instead walk in the way that Jesus has made. Father, I ask that as we gather our voices, maybe just our, sort of in our minds, this song becomes a prayer. For some of us, we have tried so hard to muster faith and to look at the right way to do things and to do those things. And those are all valuable disciplines, but they're not the way. Father, we are led by the Spirit. We are not under the law. We are called and created in a different way, and we need your help. And the beautiful thing that you have provided that help as we breathe in your life and we exhale your glory, and we breathe in your source and we exhale your praise. We breathe in your grace and we exhale your love for the world around us. God, moment by moment by moment, forge us, form us into the people that you have actually created us to be for the world. So Father, I ask you would give us faith to walk in that way. And I lift this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.
I need you to soften my heart, to break me apart. I need you to open my eyes, to see that you're shaping my life. And all I am, I surrender. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. I need you to soften my heart and break me apart. I need you to pierce through the dark and cleanse every part of me. 'Cause all I am, I surrender. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. I may be weak, I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, but my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, but my God, you never will. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, but my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. And my flesh may fail, but my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, but my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, but my God, you never will.
I still love that song. It's so powerful. And I'm just personally so encouraged by Mike's message today. The reality that surrender is not easy, that's encouraging to me, because I don't know about you, but I think for a lot of us, we believe that as Christians, if surrender is hard, or if we have to surrender over and over again in our lives, we're not doing it right. I think the reality is when surrender is hard and it's a continual thing day by day, we're perfectly positioned for the way God created us to live, dependent on His Spirit in us, not our flesh. And for me, that's encouraging because surrender can be hard, and surrender has to happen in my life over and over. And I hope for all of us that we can find grace in that and joy in that, knowing that we're positioned for God to do a work in us as we depend on His Spirit in us by faith, trusting Him. Church, I hope that you are encouraged today as we've gathered online. Hey, listen, if there's any way that we can help you in this season, please reach out and do that through the Connect card. You can go to that through our website, our app. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how we can step in and lean in with you and help you right now. And listen, church, as we continue to pray about and plan and envision what regathering looks like, just know that we are going to share that information with you as soon as we have it. That we long to regather, and as we regather, it's going to be a beautiful thing that God does in and through our church. So pray with us, hope with us, and we'll get together really soon. Church, we love you guys. Thanks for worshiping with us today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. We love you. We will see you next Sunday right here online. See ya.